She spent her last $10 helping the Mafia boss in a snowstorm the next day. Just before we start, I'm curious. What time is it where you are? Day or night, I'm grateful you're here. The blizzard hit Chicago like a white wall of fury, transforming the city into a frozen wasteland within hours. Rachel Morgan pressed her forehead against the diner's frosted window, watching the snow pile up in drifts that already reached halfway up the parked cars. Her shift had ended 20 minutes ago, but stepping outside meant facing a nightmare of ice and wind that could kill. "You should stay here tonight," Maria called from behind the counter, her worried eyes darting between Rachel and the storm. "It's not safe out there." Rachel shook her head, her light brown hair falling loose from its practical ponytail. "I can't. My landlord's already threatening eviction. If I'm not there tomorrow morning with this week's rent." She didn't finish the sentence. They both knew what happened to people who couldn't pay in this neighborhood. Her fingers found the small wad of bills in her apron pocket. $43. Her entire day's tips, every penny she'd scraped together from serving coffee and pancakes to people who barely noticed she existed. It wasn't enough. It was never enough. But it had to cover 3 more days of food and transportation until her next paycheck. The diner's door burst open, bringing a violent gust of snow and a figure that looked more like a ghost than a man. He stumbled inside, expensive black coat covered in ice, his dark hair plastered to his face. Even half frozen, there was something commanding about him. The way he carried himself, the cut of his clothes beneath the winter damage, the gold chain just visible at his collar. "We're about to close," Maria started, but Rachel was already moving. "Sit down before you fall down," Rachel said, guiding him to the nearest booth. His dark eyes met hers for just a second, sharp, assessing, dangerous even in distress, before he collapsed into the seat. "My car died 2 blocks from here," he said, his voice rough but cultured, nothing like the usual diner crowd. "Phone's dead too. I just need to warm up, then I'll find a hotel." Maria brought coffee without being asked, her movements nervous. Rachel noticed the way her boss kept glancing at the man, recognition flickering across her face followed quickly by fear. But recognition of what? "The hotels are all full," Rachel said, pouring hot coffee with steady hands despite the growing knot in her stomach. "There's a medical conference in town and the storm hit during rush hour. People are stranded everywhere." His jaw tightened, a muscle jumping beneath the dark stubble that lined his face. Up close, Rachel could see he was younger than she'd first thought, maybe mid-30s, with the kind of dangerously handsome features that belonged on movie screens, not in struggling diners. A subtle tattoo peeked from his collar, some kind of symbol she didn't recognize. "There has to be somewhere," he said, and it wasn't quite a plea. Men like him didn't plead. It was a statement, an expectation that the universe would bend to accommodate him. "There's the Skyline Motel," Rachel heard herself say. "About 4 blocks north. It's not fancy, but the owner doesn't use the booking systems. He might have a room." 4 blocks in this? He gestured to the window, where visibility had dropped to nearly 0. Rachel checked her watch. Every minute that passed was another minute closer to missing the last bus that might still be running. Another night of failure, of falling further behind. But something about the desperate edge hidden beneath his controlled exterior made her pause. "I'll take you," she said, ignoring Maria's sharp intake of breath. "I'm heading that direction anyway." It was a lie. The motel was completely out of her way. But the words were already out, and something in his eyes, gratitude mixed with surprise as if kindness was a foreign language, made her commit. 20 minutes later, they were battling through the storm. Rachel's thin coat no match for the brutal wind, while his expensive one provided only marginally better protection. She led him through shortcuts she'd learned from years of walking these streets, too poor to afford regular cab fare. "You didn't have to do this," he said, his voice barely audible over the howling wind. "Nobody should freeze to death in Chicago," Rachel replied, not mentioning that she'd almost done exactly that last winter when her heat was shut off for a week. The Skyline Motel emerged from the white chaos like a beacon, a dingy two-story building that had seen better decades. The owner, Mr. Chen, looked up from his ancient television with roomy eyes. "One room left," he announced. $100 for the night. Rachel felt her companion stiffen. She glanced at him and saw something shocking. His hand coming up empty from his pocket, his face tight with an emotion that looked almost like panic. "My wallet," he said quietly, dangerously quiet. "It must have fallen out in the snow." Mr. Chen shrugged, already turning back to his show. "No wallet, no room. Good luck out there." Rachel's hand was in her apron pocket before conscious thought caught up. Her fingers closed around the bills, her last $43, her buffer against disaster, her margin between surviving and drowning. She pulled out a 20, then another 10, then another 20. The remainder felt obscenely light in her palm. "Here," she said, pushing the money across the counter before she could think about what she was doing. "50 for the room. That's fair for a night like this." Mr. Chen's eyes narrowed, but he took the money. "Room 7, upstairs. Checkouts at 10. The man beside her had gone absolutely still. When Rachel finally looked at him, his dark eyes were fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. Not gratitude anymore. Something deeper, more complex. Something almost like recognition, as if she'd just revealed herself to be a rare and valuable thing. "Why would you do that?" he asked as they climbed the stairs, his voice low and carefully controlled. "Because it's a blizzard," Rachel said simply. "And because I could." She didn't mention that those $50 had been earmarked for her electric bill. Didn't mention that she'd now have exactly $3 to last until Friday. Didn't mention that she might have just made the stupidest financial decision of her life. At the door to room 7, he turned to face her fully for the first time. In the dim hallway light, she could see him clearly. The sharp features, the calculating intelligence in his eyes, the air of controlled power that seemed to emanate from him like heat. A small scar cut through his left eyebrow, suggesting violence in his past. "I'm Dominic," he said, extending his hand. "Rachel." His grip was firm, warm despite the cold, and sent an unexpected jolt through her system. "Rachel," he repeated, as if committing it to memory. "I won't forget this, and I always pay my debts." There was something almost threatening about the promise, as if debt repayment was a matter of honor that transcended normal human gratitude. Rachel felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the cold. "Just stay warm," she said, pulling her hand back and turning toward the stairs before she could overthink the strange encounter. The storm should clear by morning. "Rachel," he called as she reached the top of the stairs. She turned back. "What's your last name?" She hesitated, some instinct warning her that giving him more information was dangerous. But he'd already seen where she worked, and it seemed petty to refuse after everything. "Morgan, Rachel Morgan." The smile that crossed his face was slight, but genuine, transforming his severe features into something heartbreakingly handsome. "Thank you, Rachel Morgan. You have no idea what you just did." She fled into the storm, his words echoing in her head. Later, trudging through the snow toward her own cold apartment, she would replay that moment. The way he'd looked at her, the promise in his voice, the sense that she'd just set something irreversible into motion. She had no idea that the man she'd helped was Dominic Russo, the youngest Don in Chicago's history, that his name made grown men cross the street, that his family controlled everything from the docks to the downtown corridor, their influence spreading like shadows through the city's underbelly. She had no idea that her kindness had just caught the attention of the most dangerous man in Chicago. And she had absolutely no idea that Dominic Russo had just decided she belonged to him. 3 days after the blizzard, Rachel's life had returned to its normal rhythm of exhausting survival. The electric company had granted her a 5-day extension after she'd explained her situation in tears over the phone. Small mercies. She'd eaten nothing but ramen and the diner's leftovers, stretching her remaining $3 until her Friday paycheck. The morning shift was unusually slow, giving her too much time to think about the mysterious man from the storm. Dominic. She'd caught herself replaying their brief interaction more times than she cared to admit. The intensity of his gaze, the cultured tone of his voice, the way he'd made a promise sound like an oath. "Table 6 needs coffee," Maria said, snapping Rachel back to reality. Rachel grabbed the pot and turned toward the corner booth, then froze. Dominic sat there in a perfectly tailored black suit, looking impossibly out of place among the diner's faded vinyl and chipped formica. His dark hair was slicked back now, revealing the sharp angles of his face, and the dangerous elegance she'd sensed beneath the snow-covered exterior was fully on display. Their eyes met. A slow smile curved his lips. "Hello again, Rachel Morgan." Her hands shook slightly as she poured his coffee, hyper-aware of Maria's panicked expression behind the counter and the way the two other customers had suddenly found reasons to leave. "You found your wallet," Rachel said, aiming for casual and landing somewhere near breathless. "I did. Along with several other things I'd lost." His dark eyes tracked her every movement, including my sense of debt. "I told you I always pay what I owe." He slid an envelope across the table. Rachel stared at it like it might bite. "That's not necessary. It was just $50. Open it." And the command in his voice made her obey before she thought better of it. Inside were 50 crisp $100 bills, $5,000. Rachel's vision actually blurred. "I can't accept this," she whispered, trying to push it back across the table. "This is insane." His hand covered hers, stopping the movement. His touch was warm, confident, and sent electricity racing up her arm. "You can and you will. You gave me your last money in a storm that could have killed me. That kind of selflessness is rare, valuable." "I'm not some charity case," Rachel said, finding her spine despite the heat of his palm against her skin. "And I definitely didn't help you expecting to be paid back like this." Something flickered in his expression. Approval, maybe, or interest. "I know. That's exactly why you're getting it." He released her hand slowly, deliberately. "Consider it an investment." "In what?" "In making sure you never have to choose between helping someone and keeping your electricity on again." Rachel's breath caught. How did he know about that? But before she could ask, the diner's door opened and everything changed. Two men entered, their expensive suits and cold eyes marking them as decidedly not the usual breakfast crowd. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Maria disappeared into the kitchen without a word. "Mr. Russo," the older one said, his voice carrying an edge of barely concealed hostility. "We've been looking for you. Mr. DeLuca wants to discuss the waterfront situation." "Russo!" Rachel's mind raced. She'd heard that name before, whispered in the neighborhood with a mixture of fear and respect. The Russo family, the organization that controlled half the city, the empire built on violence and fear. Oh, God. Dominic's expression hadn't changed, but something in the air had shifted, a predatory stillness that made Rachel's survival instincts scream. "Tell DeLuca I'll discuss it when I'm ready, not before." "He's not a patient man," the second one said, his hand drifting toward his jacket in a movement that made Rachel's heart hammer. "Neither am I," Dominic replied, his voice dropping to something quietly lethal. "And you're interrupting my breakfast. Leave." The two men exchanged glances. Whatever they saw in Dominic's face made them back toward the door, hands raised in placating gestures. "We'll let him know," the older one said. "But he won't be happy." "He rarely is," Dominic said dismissively, turning back to his coffee as if they'd already ceased to exist. The moment the door closed behind them, Rachel stumbled backward, the envelope falling from her numb fingers. "You're a mobster," she breathed. "You're Dominic Russo, the Dominic Russo." He picked up the envelope calmly and set it back on the table. "I prefer businessman. But yes, that's one of my titles. You run the entire South Side. You—" She lowered her voice to a horrified whisper. "People say you've killed people, that families disappear when they cross you." "I don't kill people in nice diners," he said mildly. "Bad for business." "Sit down, Rachel." I should call the police. His laugh was short and humorless. Half of them are on my payroll. Sit down. Rachel sat, not because he'd ordered it, but because her legs wouldn't hold her anymore. The envelope sat between them like an accusation. Blood money. That's what it was. Money earned through God knew what crimes. I can't take this, she said again, her voice shaking. I won't be bought. You're not being bought, Dominic said, leaning forward with an intensity that pinned her in place. You're being protected. Do you understand what it means that you helped me? That my enemies know you exist now? He gestured toward where the two men had stood. DeLuca's people will have already reported back that I was here. That I was talking to a waitress named Rachel. That I gave her something. Horror crawled up Rachel's spine. So by helping you, I've made myself a target? By helping me, you've made yourself mine, he corrected, and the possessiveness in his tone should have terrified her. It did terrify her. But underneath the fear was something else, something that felt dangerously like attraction. And I protect what's mine. I'm not yours. I don't even know you. You know enough. You know I keep my promises. You know I value loyalty above everything else. And you know that $50 meant more to you than $5,000 does to me. He stood, buttoning his suit jacket with movements that spoke of wealth and power. Keep the money or burn it. That's your choice. But understand this. You're under my protection now, whether you want it or not. Anyone who touches you answers to me. He headed for the door, then paused. I'll be back tomorrow. Same time. And Rachel? His dark eyes found hers across the room. You might want to think about why you're not running out the back door right now. Why you're not scared enough to quit this job and disappear. Because we both know you should be. The door closed behind him, leaving Rachel alone with an envelope full of money and the terrifying realization that he was right. She wasn't scared enough. Part of her, a part she didn't want to examine too closely, was thrilled. That night, Rachel lay awake in her apartment, the envelope hidden under her mattress like something toxic. She'd looked him up online, finding enough information to confirm her worst fears. Dominic Russo, 33 years old, took over his family's organization 7 years ago after his father was killed in what police called a business dispute. The Russo family controlled everything from legitimate businesses to less legitimate operations throughout Chicago's South Side and beyond. There were no charges, no convictions, just whispered stories and bodies that were never found. The kind of man who made problems disappear permanently. She should be terrified. Should take the money and run, leave Chicago entirely, start over somewhere he'd never find her. But when morning came, Rachel put on her uniform and went to work, her heart hammering every time the door opened. And when Dominic walked in at exactly 9 a.m., settling into the same corner booth with the same slight smile, she poured his coffee with hands that barely shook at all. You came back, he said, approval warming his voice. I need this job, Rachel replied, setting the pot down with more force than necessary. And I don't run from things. No, Dominic agreed, studying her like she was a puzzle he was determined to solve. You really don't, do you? Most people would have fled screaming, but not Rachel Morgan. She shows up for her shift like facing down a crime lord is just another Tuesday. Is that what we're doing? Facing down? His smile widened. We're getting to know each other. You saved my life, Rachel. In my world, that creates a bond, a debt that goes beyond money. I don't want a bond with you, Rachel said, but even she could hear the lie in her voice. Yes, you do, Dominic countered softly. That's what terrifies you. Not that I'm dangerous. You already knew the world was dangerous. You've been fighting to survive in it your whole life. What terrifies you is that part of you sees me as someone who could make that fight easier. Someone strong enough to stand between you and everything that's been crushing you. His words hit too close to home. Rachel had been alone since her parents died 5 years ago, struggling through every day with nothing but her own determination to keep her going. The idea of someone powerful actually caring whether she lived or died was intoxicating and horrifying in equal measure. "Why me?" she whispered. "You could have anyone. Why are you here?" Dominic leaned back, his expression turning thoughtful. "Because you saw me freezing in a storm and didn't see the Russo name or the reputation. You saw a person who needed help. Because you gave me your last $50 without hesitation, knowing it would hurt you. Because when you found out who I was, you didn't try to use it or fear it. You just got angry that I'd put you in danger." He paused. "And because every person I've met for the last 15 years has wanted something from me. Except you. You just wanted me not to freeze." The sincerity in his voice made Rachel's throat tight. She sank into the booth across from him without thinking, abandoning all pretense of waitress and customer. "What do you want from me?" "Honestly, I'm still figuring that out." His hand moved across the table, stopping just short of touching hers. "But I'd like the chance to find out. Have dinner with me tonight, somewhere that isn't this diner." "That's insane. You're a criminal. I should be calling the police, not agreeing to dinner." "We've established the police won't help you. And I'm asking you to dinner not to join the family business." His eyes held hers, intense and surprisingly vulnerable. "One meal, Rachel. Let me show you I'm more than the stories you've heard." Every rational part of Rachel screamed to refuse. To take the money, quit her job, and disappear into obscurity where men like Dominic Russo couldn't reach her. But the irrational part, the part that had been drawn to him from the moment he'd stumbled into the diner, was already nodding. "One dinner," she heard herself say. "But I'm not promising anything beyond that." The smile that transformed his face was worth every ounce of the danger she was courting. "That's all I'm asking." He gave her an address, a restaurant she'd walked past 100 times but never imagined entering, and a time. 7 p.m. Then he stood, left a $100 bill for a $3 cup of coffee, and walked out with the same controlled grace that marked everything he did. Maria emerged from the kitchen, her face pale. "Rachel, do you have any idea what you're doing?" Rachel watched Dominic's car pull away, expensive and black, and somehow menacing even in daylight. "Not even a little bit, but I'm doing it anyway." Because she'd spent her whole life playing it safe, being invisible, surviving on scraps and hoping for nothing more than to make it to tomorrow. And Dominic Russo, dangerous and impossible as he was, made her feel like maybe, just maybe, she deserved more. Even if that feeling might destroy her. The restaurant was everything Rachel had feared. Intimidatingly elegant, with hushed conversations and a dress code she couldn't possibly meet. She'd worn her only nice dress, a simple black number from a thrift store, and felt like an imposter the moment she walked through the door. Then she saw Dominic, and nothing else mattered. He stood as she approached, his dark suit perfectly tailored, his eyes tracking her with an intensity that made her skin flush. "You look beautiful," he said, and it didn't sound like a line. It sounded like a fact. "You look dangerous," Rachel replied, and won a genuine laugh. The meal was surreal. They talked about everything except the obvious: his work, her fears, the impossibility of whatever this was becoming. Instead, he asked about her life, really asked, listening as she told him about her parents' accident, the struggle to finish community college while working 3 jobs, the constant fear of falling so far behind she'd never catch up. "You're a fighter," Dominic said, refilling her wine glass. "Most people born into your circumstances would have given up or turned to easier paths. But not you. Easier paths usually come with strings attached," Rachel said. "I've seen what happens to girls who think there's a shortcut out of poverty. It never ends well." "Smart." He paused, then added quietly, "I was born into wealth, but not the kind that comes without strings. My father built an empire, but the cost was measured in blood and betrayal. By the time I was old enough to understand what he really was, I was already too deep to escape." Rachel set down her fork, studying him. "You could have walked away." "No," Dominic said, his voice hardening. "I couldn't. When my father was killed, his enemies came for me. For my mother, My sister. The only way to protect them was to become more ruthless than anyone expected. To take control of everything he built and turn it into something even his killers feared. His jaw tightened. I was 26. And I learned very quickly that mercy is a luxury I couldn't afford. But you showed me mercy, Rachel whispered. You could have ignored what I did, paid me back the 50 and walked away. Instead, you're here. Because you reminded me what mercy looks like, Dominic said, reaching across the table to take her hand. His touch was warm, his thumb brushing across her knuckles in a gesture that felt both innocent and intimate. Everyone in my world operates on transactions. Favors owed, debts paid, loyalty bought. But you gave me something without expecting anything in return. Do you have any idea how rare that is? Rachel's heart was racing. This is crazy. We barely know each other. Then let's change that. Dominic stood, still holding her hand, and guided her to her feet. Come with me. Where? Somewhere we can talk without an audience. He led her through the restaurant to a private elevator, his hand never leaving hers. They rode in silence to the top floor, emerging into what was clearly a personal apartment, modern and minimalist, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Chicago skyline. You live here? Rachel asked, taking in the space that probably cost more than she'd earn in a lifetime. Sometimes, when I need to think. He moved to the windows, hands in his pockets, looking out at the city that he controlled from the shadows. Tell me the truth, Rachel. Why aren't you running? I don't know, she admitted, joining him at the window. I should be. Everything about this is wrong. You're a criminal. You've probably done terrible things. And I'm just a waitress who can barely keep her electricity on. We don't make sense. No, we don't, Dominic agreed, turning to face her. The city lights cast shadows across his face, highlighting the scar through his eyebrow and the dangerous beauty of his features. But I haven't stopped thinking about you since the blizzard. About the way you looked at me like I was just a person, not a title. About your kindness in a world that's shown you very little of it. Dominic. I know this is insane, he continued, stepping closer. I know I should leave you alone, let you go back to your safe, normal life. But I can't. Because for the first time in 7 years, I feel like I'm not just the Russo heir. I'm just Dominic, a man who wants to know a brave, beautiful woman who saved his life. Rachel's breath caught as he raised his hand to her face, his thumb tracing her cheekbone with devastating gentleness. I don't do relationships, she whispered. I can't afford distractions. What if I'm not a distraction? What if I'm the answer to every problem that's been crushing you? You can't buy me, Dominic. Not with money, not with protection, not with pretty words. I don't want to buy you, he said, his voice rough. I want to earn you. I want you to choose me knowing exactly what I am and deciding I'm worth the risk anyway. And what are you? Rachel asked, even though she already knew the answer. Dangerous, Dominic admitted, his dark eyes holding hers. Possessive, ruthless to my enemies and protective of what's mine. I've done terrible things to terrible people, Rachel. I won't lie about that. My hands aren't clean and they never will be. Then why would I choose you? Because underneath the title and the reputation, I'm still that man freezing in the storm. Still someone who needs saving. His forehead touched hers, their breaths mingling. And because I see you, Rachel Morgan. Not a waitress or a charity case or someone to be pitied. I see a survivor, a fighter, someone strong enough to stand beside me instead of behind me. Rachel should have pulled away, should have run while she still could. But Dominic's words wrapped around her like a promise. And when he kissed her, soft and questioning and full of restrained hunger, she kissed him back. The kiss deepened, his arms sliding around her waist as she gripped his shoulders. And for a moment, Rachel let herself forget everything except the feeling of being wanted. Not for what she could provide or what she represented, but for herself. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Dominic rested his forehead against hers. Stay with me tonight. Just to talk. I'm not asking for more than you're willing to give. I should go home, Rachel said, but she didn't move. You should, Dominic agreed. But you're not going to. He was right. Rachel stayed, and they talked through the night. About his mother who'd retreated into isolation after his father's death. About his younger sister who'd escaped to Europe and refused to come back. About the impossible weight of running an empire he'd never wanted but couldn't abandon. And Rachel told him about her dreams, small and attainable, of someday having enough money to feel safe, of maybe going back to school, of not being afraid every single day. I could give you all of that, Dominic said as dawn broke over the city. They were sitting on his couch now, Rachel's head on his shoulder, his arm around her waist. Safety. Education. A life without fear. At what cost? Rachel asked. Just one thing. He tilted her face up to his expression serious. Let me into your life. Really in. Let me protect you. Take care of you. Trust me even though every rational instinct tells you not to. And if I can't? Then I'll wait until you can. He kissed her forehead gently. I'm a patient man when something matters. And you, Rachel Morgan, matter more than anything has in a very long time. Rachel closed her eyes, feeling the walls she'd built around herself beginning to crumble. This was insane, dangerous, impossible. But when Dominic held her like she was something precious, she could almost believe it was worth the risk. The sun rose higher, painting the apartment in gold, and Rachel made a decision that would change everything. She turned in his arms and kissed him, pouring into it all the fear and hope and desperate longing she'd been holding back. When they broke apart, Dominic's eyes were dark with promise and possession. Mine, he whispered against her lips. Say it. Yours, Rachel breathed, and felt the last of her resistance shatter. She had no idea that Dominic's rival, Marcus DeLuca, had been watching the building all night. That photographs of her entering and never leaving were already being developed. That her decision to give herself to the most dangerous man in Chicago had just painted a target on her back that would bring violence to her doorstep. All Rachel knew was that for the first time in her life she felt protected, wanted, cherished. It would be enough to sustain her through the nightmare that was coming. Because in Dominic Russo's world, love was the most dangerous weapon of all. The next 2 weeks were the happiest of Rachel's life, which should have been her first warning that something was about to go terribly wrong. Dominic was careful with her, respectful of her boundaries even as the chemistry between them grew increasingly impossible to ignore. He sent cars to pick her up after work, took her to dinners that cost more than her monthly rent, and somehow made her feel like she was the one doing him a favor by accepting. But more than the luxury, it was the small moments that undid her. The way he listened when she talked about her day. How he remembered she took her coffee with 2 sugars and always had it ready when she arrived. The protective hand at the small of her back when they walked through crowded restaurants. The hungry look in his eyes that promised everything while demanding nothing until she was ready. You're different with her, Marco, one of Dominic's men, commented one evening as they watched Rachel through the restaurant window, waiting for her shift to end. Softer. She makes me want to be different, Dominic replied, his eyes never leaving Rachel's form. Makes me remember there's more to life than territory and respect. Boss, I have to say it. DeLuca's been asking questions. About her. Where she lives, where she works, who her friends are. He knows she matters to you. Dominic's expression hardened. Then make sure she's never alone. I want someone watching her apartment, the diner, every route between them. If DeLuca so much as looks at her wrong, I want to know about it. We're stretched thin with the waterfront situation. I don't care if we have to pull men from every other operation, Dominic said, his voice dropping to something lethal. Rachel's safety is the priority. Am I clear? Crystal, boss. But Dominic's precautions couldn't stop what was already in motion. That night, as Rachel walked the 3 blocks from the bus stop to her apartment, a route she'd taken 1,000 times, she felt eyes on her. turned around twice but saw nothing, told herself she was being paranoid, that Dominic's world was making her see threats that didn't exist. She was fumbling with her keys when the van pulled up. Everything happened so fast. Hands grabbing her, a cloth over her mouth smelling of chemicals, her keys clattering to the ground as darkness swallowed her whole. The last thing she heard was a man's voice. DeLuca sends his regards to the Russo family. Rachel woke in a dark room that smelled of mold and rust, her head pounding and her hands zip-tied behind her back. Panic crashed over her in waves until she forced herself to breathe, to think, to remember everything Dominic had told her about staying calm under pressure. "You're his weakness," a voice said from the shadows. A man stepped forward, older, maybe 50, with cold eyes and a smile that made Rachel's skin crawl. The great Dominic Russo, brought low by a waitress. It's almost poetic. "He'll kill you," Rachel said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "Whatever you're planning, it won't work." "Oh, I'm counting on him trying," Marcus DeLuca said, circling her chair like a predator. "See, your boyfriend has something I want. The waterfront territory that should have been mine. And now I have something he wants. The question is, what's he willing to trade?" "You're using me as leverage," Rachel realized, horror mixing with a strange, detached calm. "You're going to offer to trade me for territory." Smart girl, though I'm not sure Russo will see it that way. Men like him don't react well to threats against what they consider theirs. DeLuca leaned close, his breath hot against her ear. "And from what my sources tell me, he considers you very much his." Rachel said nothing, but her mind was racing. If Dominic tried to trade for her, DeLuca would have him at a disadvantage. But if he didn't, Rachel would. What? She forced herself not to think about that option. "Nothing to say?" DeLuca straightened. "That's fine. You'll have plenty of time to think while we wait for Russo to make his move. Just know that your survival depends entirely on how much you're actually worth to him." He left, locking the door behind him. Rachel immediately started working on the zip ties, using a technique she'd learned from a YouTube video years ago about escaping restraints. It took 20 minutes and left her wrists bloody, but the ties finally snapped. She was examining the locked door when her phone, which her captors had apparently forgotten to take, buzzed in her pocket. Dominic's name flashed on the screen. "Rachel!" His voice was strained, desperate in a way she'd never heard. "Tell me where you are." "I don't know. Some kind of warehouse. They grabbed me outside my apartment." She kept her voice low, checking the dirty window high on the wall. "Dominic, it's DeLuca. He wants to trade me for the waterfront." The sound on the other end was somewhere between a growl and a curse. "I'm going to destroy him, completely. There won't be enough left of him to bury." "Don't," Rachel said urgently. "That's what he wants. He's trying to bait you into a war." "He took you," Dominic said, his voice cold and flat and absolutely terrifying. "There's already a war. He just doesn't know he's already lost." "Dominic, please. Stay on the line. My people are tracking your phone now. I'm coming for you, Rachel. And God help anyone who stands between us." Rachel heard voices outside the door. "I have to go. They're coming back." "Hide the phone. Don't hang up. I need to hear what's happening." Rachel shoved the phone behind a loose brick just as the door opened. DeLuca entered with 2 men, his expression calculating as he studied her. "I'm told Russo's moving his pieces already, pulling men from all his operations, reaching out to allies, all for one little waitress." He shook his head. "Either you're exceptional in bed, or he's lost his mind. Or maybe I'm just a person and he actually cares what happens to people," Rachel shot back. "Novel concept in your world, I know." DeLuca's hand shot out, gripping her chin hard enough to bruise. "Careful. You're only valuable to me alive, but nobody said you had to be undamaged." Rachel held his gaze, refusing to flinch. "Damage me and Dominic won't negotiate. He'll just come through you like a hurricane." "He'll try," DeLuca agreed, releasing her with a shove. "But I have something he's never had: patience. I can wait him out, let him make mistakes trying to find you. By the time we meet for the exchange, he'll be desperate." vulnerable. He gestured to his men. Move her to the secondary location. If Russo's tracking her somehow, I want to be gone before he gets here. Rachel's heart sank as they grabbed her arms. She couldn't let them move her. Dominic would never find her in time. She did the only thing she could think of. She started screaming, loud and continuous, anything to buy time. One of the men slapped her hard enough to snap her head sideways. "Shut up!" "No!" Rachel screamed louder, throwing her weight around, making herself as difficult as possible. "Help! Someone help me!" DeLuca's eyes narrowed. "Sedate her! Now!" But before the man could reach for whatever drug they had planned, the building's entire wall exploded inward. Not metaphorically, literally exploded. Dominic came through the opening like something out of a nightmare, flanked by a dozen men, all armed, all moving with military precision. The room erupted in chaos, DeLuca's men reaching for weapons they'd never get to use, Dominic's people taking them down with brutal efficiency. And through it all, Dominic moved toward Rachel with single-minded focus, his eyes locked on hers. "Get down!" he shouted, and Rachel dropped to the floor as violence erupted around her. She didn't see what happened, kept her eyes squeezed shut and her hands over her ears. But she heard shouts, crashes, the sickening sound of impact. When silence finally fell, she felt gentle hands on her shoulders. "Rachel, look at me." She opened her eyes to find Dominic crouched in front of her, his suit torn and his knuckles bleeding but his expression fierce with relief and rage. "Are you hurt?" "No, Her voice broke. "I'm okay." He pulled her against him so hard it hurt, one hand cradling her head while the other locked around her waist. "I thought I'd lost you," he said into her hair. "When Marco called and said you'd been taken, He pulled back, his hands framing her face, and she saw something she'd never expected. Tears in his eyes. "Don't ever scare me like that again." "Where's DeLuca?" Rachel asked, looking around the destroyed warehouse. Bodies littered the ground, DeLuca's men, all unconscious or incapacitated. But no DeLuca. Dominic's expression went cold. He ran. Coward couldn't even face me after taking what's mine. He stood, keeping Rachel behind him protectively. "Marco, secure the perimeter. I want DeLuca found tonight. He doesn't get to breathe free air after this." "Boss, we should get her somewhere safe," Marco said, appearing from the shadows. "He might have backup coming." Dominic nodded, then swept Rachel into his arms before she could protest. "Hold on to me." He carried her through the destroyed wall to a waiting car, his men forming a protective circle around them. Rachel caught glimpses of the aftermath, DeLuca's men being zip-tied and loaded into vans, evidence being collected, the organized chaos of Dominic's people cleaning up a situation with practiced efficiency. "This is your world," Rachel said quietly as they sped through the city. "This violence, this fear." "Yes," Dominic said, his jaw tight. "And after tonight, I can't pretend otherwise. I brought this to your doorstep, Rachel. DeLuca took you because of me." "He took me because he's a monster who uses people as pawns," Rachel corrected. "That's not your fault." "It is," Dominic said, and the anguish in his voice broke her heart. "I knew the risks. Knew that being seen with me would paint a target on your back. But I was selfish. I wanted you too much to walk away." The car pulled up to a building Rachel didn't recognize. Some kind of fortress disguised as a luxury apartment complex. Dominic carried her inside despite her protests, up a private elevator to a penthouse apartment that made his other place look modest. "You'll stay here?" he said, setting her down gently on an enormous couch. "It's the most secure building in the city. Armed guards at every entrance, bulletproof windows, safe room in the bedroom. DeLuca won't get within a mile of this place." "For how long?" Rachel asked. "As long as it takes," Dominic said, kneeling in front of her to examine her bruised wrists and face. His touch was impossibly gentle given what she'd just seen him do. "Until DeLuca's been dealt with. Until every threat to you has been eliminated." "And then what?" I hide here forever? Give up my job, my life, my independence? Dominic's hands stilled. What are you saying? I'm saying I can't live like this, Rachel said, tears finally spilling over. Waiting for the next rival to use me as leverage, being locked away in a golden cage. This isn't a life, Dominic. It's a prison. Then I'll fix it, Dominic said desperately. I'll end the war with DeLuca, strengthen the family's position until no one dares challenge us. I'll make you safe, Rachel. Whatever it takes. At what cost? Rachel asked. How many people have to die? How much blood has to be spilled? Dominic's face went blank, carefully empty. As much as necessary. Rachel looked at the man she'd fallen for. This dangerous, powerful, impossibly complicated man who'd turned her world upside down. She saw the blood on his knuckles, the cold calculation in his eyes, the willingness to do terrible things in her name. And underneath it all, she saw the man from the blizzard. The one who'd needed help, the one who'd looked at her like she was something precious. I need time, she whispered. Time to think about whether I can really be part of this world. Dominic stood slowly, his expression carefully controlled. Of course. Take all the time you need. He headed for the door, then paused. But Rachel, whatever you decide, know this. I would burn this entire city down before I'd let anyone hurt you again. That's not a threat or a promise. It's just a fact. He left, and Rachel sat alone in the beautiful prison he'd built for her, wondering if love was supposed to feel this much like drowning. Outside, Dominic made a call. Find DeLuca. I don't care where he's hiding. I don't care how many of his people you have to go through. Find him and bring him to me. Because Marcus DeLuca had made a fundamental mistake. He'd hurt the only person in the world Dominic loved more than power, and for that, there would be no mercy, no negotiation, no escape. Just an ending that would serve as a warning to anyone else who thought Rachel Morgan was a weakness to exploit. She wasn't his weakness. She was his reason for being absolutely ruthless. 3 days passed in the penthouse fortress. 3 days where Rachel saw no one but the silent guards who brought her meals and checked her security. Dominic didn't come, didn't call. The silence was both a relief and an agony that gnawed at her constantly. On the 4th morning, Marco appeared at her door. He wants to see you, if you're willing. Rachel followed him to a car, then through a route that took so many turns she lost track of where they were going. They finally stopped at what looked like an abandoned industrial building, but the guard stationed at every entrance told a different story. Inside, Dominic stood at a floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the city, his back to her. He looked like he hadn't slept in days, his shirt wrinkled, his hair disheveled, the careful control he usually maintained frayed at the edges. It's done, he said without turning around. DeLuca won't be a problem anymore. Rachel's breath caught. What did you do? What I had to, Dominic said, finally facing her. His eyes were haunted, empty in a way that terrified her more than any violence. He's gone. His entire operation has been absorbed or scattered. The waterfront is secure. You're safe. At what cost? Rachel whispered, even though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. Does it matter? Dominic asked. You wanted safety. You have it. You wanted the threat eliminated. It's eliminated. It matters because of what it cost you, Rachel said, moving closer despite her fear. I can see it in your eyes. Whatever you did, it's eating you alive. Dominic laughed, harsh and bitter. You don't want to know what I did, Rachel. Trust me. The man you thought you knew? He doesn't exist. He never did. I'm exactly what everyone says I am. A monster who destroys anyone who threatens what's mine. Stop it, Rachel said, reaching for him. He stepped back, avoiding her touch. I'm giving you an out, Dominic said flatly. The threat's gone. You can go back to your life. The money I gave you is yours to keep. I'll make sure no one from my world ever bothers you again. You can pretend the last month never happened. Rachel stared at him, understanding finally clicking into place. You're pushing me away. I'm setting you free, Dominic corrected. Before you get hurt again. Before my world destroys you completely. What if I don't want to be free? Rachel asked, and saw something flicker in his carefully blank expression. What if I choose you anyway, knowing exactly what you are? Then you're a fool, Dominic said, but there was desperate hope underlying the harsh words. I can't change, Rachel. This is who I am, who I'll always be. I know, Rachel said, closing the distance between them despite his retreat. I've spent 3 days thinking about nothing else. About the violence and the danger and the impossibility of us. About every reason I should walk away and never look back. And I kept coming back to one thing, Rachel said, reaching up to touch his face. This time he didn't pull away, just closed his eyes like her touch hurt. That night in the blizzard, I saw who you really are under all the armor. A man who's been fighting so long he's forgotten there's more to life than survival. A man who's convinced himself he doesn't deserve softness or kindness or love. I don't, Dominic said roughly. Not after the things I've done. Maybe not, Rachel agreed, but I'm giving it to you anyway. If you want it. Dominic's eyes opened, dark and intense and full of raw emotion. Why? Why would you choose this? Choose me? Because you chose me first, Rachel said simply. Because you saw a struggling waitress and decided she was worth protecting, worth caring about, worth turning your entire world upside down for, and because underneath the crime lord and the reputation, you're still that man freezing in a storm, still someone who needs saving. I don't deserve you, Dominic whispered, his forehead dropping to touch hers. Probably not, Rachel said, trying for lightness despite the tears on her cheeks. But you're stuck with me anyway. Dominic's arms came around her then, crushing her against him with desperate strength. If you stay, there's no halfway. You're mine, Rachel. Completely. And I protect what's mine with everything I have. I know, Rachel said against his chest. And I'm yours, completely, for better or worse. It might be worse more often than better, Dominic warned. I can handle worse, Rachel replied. I've been handling worse my entire life. At least now I won't be handling it alone. Dominic pulled back just enough to kiss her, deep and claiming and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, some of the haunted look had left his eyes. I need to tell you something, he said, about what happened with DeLuca. You don't have to. I do, Dominic interrupted. If we're doing this, really doing this, you need to know the truth. All of it. They sat, and Dominic told her everything. About tracking DeLuca to his safe house, about the confrontation that followed, about the choice he'd given DeLuca, leave Chicago forever and never return or face the consequences. About how DeLuca had chosen to fight instead of flee, and about how that fight had ended. He's alive, Dominic said, watching Rachel's reaction carefully. Barely. In a hospital under guard, facing federal charges that will put him away for the rest of his life. I could have handled it differently, could have made him disappear. But I didn't want that between us. Didn't want you thinking I was a murderer. You're not, Rachel said softly. You're a survivor in an impossible situation, doing what you think you have to do. That's generous, Dominic said with a slight smile. It's honest, Rachel corrected. I'm not going to pretend I love everything about your world, Dominic, but I love you. And I trust that you're trying to be better. That's enough. I love you, Dominic said, and it sounded like a vow. I will keep you safe. I will try to be worthy of you. And I will never, ever let anyone hurt you again. Hurt. I believe you, Rachel said, and meant it. The next weeks were an adjustment. Rachel kept her job at the diner despite Dominic's protests, insisting that she needed some part of her life that was still hers. They compromised. She worked, but always with protection nearby, always with someone watching. Maria got over her initial terror and started treating Dominic like a regular customer, which amused him endlessly. Most people cross the street when they see me, he told Rachel one morning over coffee. Your boss lectures me about taking up table space during rush hour. She's fearless, Rachel said fondly. Always has been. Dominic's family was harder. His mother refused to meet Rachel, convinced that her son had lost his mind. His sister called from London, concerned but curious. If she makes you happy, then I'm happy, Sophia told him. God knows you haven't been happy in years. The organization adjusted slowly to having their boss in a serious relationship. Marco became Rachel's unofficial bodyguard and surprising friend. Never thought I'd see the boss like this, he told her one day while driving her home from work. Softer, more human. He was always human, Rachel said. He just forgot for a while. Maybe, Marco agreed. But you reminded him. That's valuable. That's worth protecting. 6 months after the blizzard, Dominic took Rachel back to the Skyline Motel. Mr. Chen looked up from his television, did a double take at Dominic in his expensive suit, then broke into a rare smile. Room 7 available, he announced. On the house for the man who actually paid $50 for it. They climbed the familiar stairs, and Dominic unlocked the door to the same dingy room where everything had changed. It had been cleaned up since, almost renovated, but still maintained its character. I bought the motel, Dominic said as Rachel looked around in surprise. Couldn't let the place where we started get torn down. You're ridiculous, Rachel said, but she was smiling. I'm in love, Dominic corrected, pulling a small box from his pocket. And I wanted to ask you something in the place where you first saved me. Rachel's breath caught as he knelt, opening the box to reveal a ring that was beautiful without being ostentatious. Perfect for her. Rachel Morgan, you saved my life in a blizzard with $50 and a kind heart. You saw past everything I am to who I could be. You chose me knowing the danger and the darkness and the impossibility of us. His voice roughened with emotion. Would you do me the honor of spending the rest of your life reminding me that I'm more than my worst moments? Will you marry me? Rachel dropped to her knees in front of him, framing his face with her hands. Yes, 1,000 times. Yes. The kiss was soft and sweet and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, Dominic slid the ring onto her finger with shaking hands. I don't deserve you, he said. Stop saying that, Rachel replied. We deserve each other. We've both fought too hard not to. They spent the night in room 7, talking and laughing and planning a future that seemed impossible and perfect in equal measure. And when morning came, they walked out together into a world that was dangerous and complicated, but somehow more bearable because they were facing it side by side. Ready? Dominic asked, his hand finding hers. For anything, Rachel replied. As long as we're together. And she meant it. Because somewhere between a blizzard and a crime lord's penthouse, Rachel had learned that love wasn't about finding someone perfect. It was about finding someone worth fighting for. And Dominic Russo, dangerous, complicated, impossibly devoted Dominic, was worth every fight. The wedding was small, intimate, and definitely not what anyone expected from a man of Dominic's position. No ostentatious display of wealth, no hundreds of guests from the organization, no showing off power or influence. Just Rachel, Dominic, and the few people who actually mattered, Maria from the diner, Marco and a handful of Dominic's most trusted people, and via video call, Sophia from London. They married in the penthouse where Dominic had first confessed his feelings, with the Chicago skyline as their witness. Rachel wore a simple white dress from a boutique Dominic had taken her to, elegant without being excessive. Dominic wore his signature black suit, but his eyes held a softness that transformed his usual dangerous edge into something achingly vulnerable. I promise to protect you, Dominic said during his vows, his voice steady but his hands shaking as they held hers. To honor you. To remember that love is worth more than power, and that you are worth more than any empire I could build. You saved me in a blizzard, Rachel, and I promise to spend the rest of my life being worthy of that salvation. Rachel's voice was thick with tears when she replied, I promise to see you. Not the title, Not the reputation, but the man underneath. To stand beside you through every storm. To remind you when you forget that you're more than your worst days. You showed me that I was worth protecting, Dominic. And I promise to show you that you're worth loving. When they kissed, it felt like a promise and a beginning wrapped together. The months that followed were an exercise in building a life that balanced two impossible worlds. Rachel continued working at the diner 3 days a week, refusing to give up the independence and normalcy it represented. Dominic grumbled about it constantly, but eventually accepted that his wife was stubborn in ways that even his considerable will couldn't overcome. "She's good for you," Marco said one day, watching Dominic actually laugh at something Rachel had texted him. "Never thought I'd see the boss checking his phone every 5 minutes like a teenager." "She's the best thing that ever happened to me," Dominic replied without hesitation. "And yes, I'm pathetically in love with my wife. Tell anyone and I'll demote you." Marco grinned. "Your secret's safe with me, boss." The organization adjusted to having a first lady who was more interested in community work than criminal enterprise. Rachel used Dominic's resources, and his reluctant permission, to start programs for at-risk youth in the neighborhoods the Russo family controlled. Education initiatives, job training, safe spaces for kids who needed them. "You're using my money to compete with my own recruitment pipeline," Dominic observed one evening, watching Rachel go over budgets for her latest project. "I'm using your money to make sure kids have options besides your recruitment pipeline," Rachel corrected. "There's a difference. I'm creating law-abiding citizens in my own territory." "My father would be horrified." "Your father would be impressed that his son found a way to strengthen the community's loyalty without resorting to fear," Rachel countered. "People protect what they value. And you're giving them something to value." Dominic pulled her into his lap, nuzzling her neck. "When did you become so wise?" "Somewhere between marrying a crime lord and realizing he actually listens to me," Rachel said, threading her fingers through his hair. "It's intoxicating, having this much influence." "Careful," Dominic murmured against her skin. "Next, you'll be running the organization yourself. Please, I have enough trouble running my programs." "Your empire can stay your problem." But Rachel's influence was undeniable. Slowly, carefully, she convinced Dominic to shift some of the family's operations toward legitimate businesses. It wasn't transformation, the Russo family would always operate in shadows, but it was evolution. A recognition that power could come from community investment as much as from fear. "You're changing him," Sophia said during one of her rare visits home. She and Rachel sat in the penthouse while Dominic handled business elsewhere. "Our father would have destroyed anyone who suggested going legitimate. But Dominic actually listens to you. He wants to be better," Rachel said simply. "I just remind him why it matters." "He loves you," Sophia said. "Really loves you. I wasn't sure he was capable of that anymore after everything he's been through. But then I see how he looks at you and—" She smiled. "Thank you for giving my brother back his humanity." "He never lost it," Rachel replied. "He just buried it to survive. I just helped him dig it back up." A year into their marriage, Rachel discovered she was pregnant. The news sent Dominic into a panic that would have been funny if it wasn't so endearing. "We're not ready," he said, pacing the penthouse like a caged animal. "The world I live in, it's not safe for a child. What if someone tries to use them like DeLuca tried to use you? What if—" "Dominic," Rachel interrupted, catching his hand and pulling him to a stop. "Breathe. We'll figure it out together, like we figure everything else out." "I don't know how to be a father," Dominic said, and there was real fear in his eyes. "My own father was. He was a monster, Rachel. What if I'm like him? What if I can't be better?" Rachel placed his hand on her still flat stomach. "You're already better, because you're afraid of being like him, because you care, because you're choosing love over power every single day." "What if it's not enough?" Dominic whispered. "Then we'll learn together," Rachel said firmly. "Just like we've learned everything else." The pregnancy changed something in Dominic. The dangerous edge that had always been present softened into fierce protectiveness. He became almost obsessive about Rachel's safety and health, driving her crazy with his overprotectiveness. "I'm pregnant, not dying," Rachel told him after he'd tried to forbid her from walking to the corner store. "You need to relax." "I can't relax when you're carrying the most precious thing in my life," Dominic replied. "Both of you. My entire world is wrapped up in you and this baby. Do you understand how terrifying that is for someone like me?" Rachel understood, because she felt it too, the weight of creating new life in a world that was still dangerous, still complicated. But she also felt hope. Hope that they could give their child something neither of them had really known: stability, safety, unconditional love. 7 months later, Rachel gave birth to a daughter they named Grace, because, as Rachel said through tears of exhaustion and joy, Grace was what had brought them together in the first place. Dominic held his daughter with shaking hands, his eyes filled with tears as he studied her tiny, perfect face. "I promise," he whispered to her. "I promise to be better, to build a world worthy of you, to make sure you never have to be afraid." Rachel watched her dangerous, impossible husband fall completely in love with their daughter and felt her heart expand in ways she hadn't known were possible. This was what they'd been fighting for. This moment, this family, this future they'd built from a blizzard and $50 and impossible hope. "She's beautiful," Maria said when she visited, holding Grace with practiced ease. "Looks like her mama." "She's perfect," Dominic corrected, unable to take his eyes off his daughter. "She's lucky," Marco added, appearing in the doorway with the elaborate security protocols that now governed their home. "Having parents who love each other this much, who fought this hard to be together." He was right. Grace was lucky, but so were Rachel and Dominic. Lucky to have found each other. Lucky to have survived everything that had tried to tear them apart. Lucky to have built something beautiful from something that should have been impossible. 2 years after the blizzard, Rachel stood in the penthouse with Dominic and Grace, watching snow fall over Chicago. It was the first major storm of the season, and Rachel found herself thinking about that night, about the desperate stranger she'd helped, never imagining it would lead here. "What are you thinking?" Dominic asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind, while Grace played at their feet. "About how much can change from one moment of kindness," Rachel said. "About how close I came to walking past you that night. About how different our lives would be if I had." "I would have frozen," Dominic said lightly, but his arms tightened. "And you'd still be struggling to survive on $3 and hope." "No," Rachel disagreed. "You would have found a way to survive. You always do. And I would have kept fighting. But we wouldn't have had this family, this life." $50, Dominic mused. "The best investment you ever made." "The best gift I ever gave," Rachel corrected. "And you've spent every day since giving it back to me 1,000 times over." Grace toddled over, demanding to be picked up. Dominic swept her into his arms, and Rachel's heart clenched at the picture they made. The dangerous crime lord transformed into a devoted father, his daughter's laughter the only sound that mattered. "Thank you," Dominic said quietly, his eyes meeting Rachel's over Grace's head. "For saving me, for choosing me, for giving me a reason to be more than what I was born to be." "Thank you for seeing me," Rachel replied. "For making me feel like I was worth something, for proving that love can survive even in the darkest places." They stood together watching the snow fall, a family built from impossible circumstances and fierce determination. The world outside was still dangerous. Dominic's organization still operated in shadows. There were still threats, still complications, still days when Rachel wondered if normal would ever be an option. But there was also this: love that had survived storms both literal and metaphorical. A man who'd learned that power was nothing compared to coming home to his family. A woman who'd discovered she was strong enough to stand beside him without losing herself. And a daughter who would grow up knowing that her father was complicated and flawed, but absolutely devoted to her happiness. "Tell me the story again," Grace demanded, as she did most nights. About the snow and Mama's money. Dominic settled onto the couch with Grace in his lap and Rachel beside him. Once upon a time, he began, there was a terrible blizzard, and a brave woman who had almost nothing decided to help a stranger anyway. Rachel listened to him tell their story, sanitized for their daughter's ears but still true in all the ways that mattered. She watched Grace's eyes grow heavy as Dominic's voice washed over her, watched the fierce crime lord become just a father telling his daughter about the day he met her mother. And she knew, with absolute certainty, that every choice she'd made, every risk she'd taken, every fear she'd overcome, had been worth it for this moment, for this impossible, complicated, beautiful family they'd built from a blizzard and a choice to be kind when it mattered most. Outside, the snow continued to fall over Chicago, covering the city in white. But inside the penthouse, wrapped in Dominic's arms with their daughter between them, Rachel had never felt warmer. "I love you," Dominic whispered when Grace finally fell asleep. "I love you too," Rachel replied. "Thank you for being worth saving." "Thank you for thinking I was," Dominic said. "Thank you for everything." They sat in comfortable silence as night fell, three people who'd found each other against impossible odds and built something worth protecting. The dangerous crime lord, the struggling waitress, and the daughter who represented their hope for the future. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was better, because it was real, earned through struggle and sacrifice and the daily choice to love, despite everything that said they shouldn't. And as Grace stirred in her sleep, her tiny hand clutching her father's finger while her head rested on her mother's chest, Rachel knew this was exactly where she was meant to be. Home? Finally, completely, impossibly home.